He pulled a stranger from a burning wreck during the worst storm of the year. 24 hours later, armed men were hunting them both. And the only thing standing between a billionaire and the people trying to destroy her was a broke single father who had absolutely nothing left to lose. If you're watching this right now, drop a like and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Stay until the end, because the moment this man made his choice in the middle of that storm is the moment everything changed, for both of them. The morning started the way bad mornings always did in Grayson Reed's house, with something breaking. Not dramatically, not the kind of breaking that announced itself with a crash or a bang, just the slow, quiet kind, the kind that had been coming for weeks and finally chose 7:15 on a Tuesday to finish the job. The kitchen faucet had been dripping since March. This morning it stopped dripping and started running. A thin, steady stream that wouldn't shut off no matter how hard Grayson cranked the handle. He stood at the sink in his undershirt and work pants, one boot already on, the other sitting by the door, and he stared at the water running down the drain like it was personally offending him. "Dad?" Chloe's voice came from down the hall. "Dad, have you seen my bow?" "Which bow?" "The blue one, the one that goes with my recital dress." "Check the laundry basket." "I already checked." "Check it again." A pause. Then, from further away, "It's not here." Grayson turned the faucet handle one more time, hard enough that the joint groaned, and the stream slowed to almost nothing, not fixed, just discouraged. He wiped his hand on his pants leg and went to find the bow. He found it on the bathroom counter, sitting right next to the toothbrush holder where Chloe had obviously left it the night before and then forgotten about entirely. He picked it up, walked down the hall, and held it out to his daughter without a word. Chloe was 8 years old and already had the particular talent of looking at her father like he was both completely useless and absolutely essential at the exact same time. She took the bow, examined it like she was checking for damage, and then turned back to the mirror to work it into her hair. "The competition starts at 2, she said. "I know. Mrs. Hannigan says if we're late, they might not let us perform." "We won't be late." "You said that last time." "Last time the truck had a flat. That was different." "You also said the time before that we wouldn't be late, and we were 7 minutes late, and—" "Chloe." He said it gently but firmly, the way he'd learned to say most things over the past 4 years. "I will be there. 2 o'clock. Front row if I can get it." She looked at him in the mirror. She had her mother's eyes, dark brown, slightly too serious for her age, the kind of eyes that had figured out early that the world required careful watching. She studied him for a moment, the way kids do when they're deciding whether to believe something. Then she nodded once, went back to her bow, and that was that. He made her breakfast, eggs and toast, the only 2 things she'd reliably eat before a performance, and watched her eat while he stood at the counter with coffee that had gone lukewarm. The kitchen was small. The whole house was small. A 2-bedroom rental in the unincorporated outskirts of Millhaven, a town most people drove through without slowing down. The walls needed repainting. The carpet in the living room was starting to separate at one of the seams. The window above the sink had a crack in the corner of the glass that Grayson had been meaning to replace since October. He rented. He could not afford to own. He had tried once, briefly, in the year before everything changed. And then the everything changing happened, and the dream of owning became one more item on a very long list of things he'd put away until later. Later kept not arriving. He dropped Chloe at school at 8, drove back to the house, and sat for a few minutes with the truck idling in the driveway. He had a job scheduled for that morning, a bathroom retile in the newer part of town, decent money, the kind of work he could finish by noon if things went smoothly. He'd planned the whole day around it. Finish by noon, eat something, shower, pick up Chloe early so she wasn't anxious, get her to the competition with time to warm up. His phone buzzed. He picked it up and looked at the screen. An unsaved number. He almost let it go to voicemail. He answered. "Is this Reed Construction?" The voice was a man's, older, slightly out of breath. "Grayson Reed?" "Speaking." "I got your number from Davis over at Hendricks Hardware. I have a situation. Water damage, bad water damage. I'm talking subfloor exposure. The support beams under my kitchen are showing moisture, and I've got a contractor coming through the property tomorrow morning for an appraisal. A pause. I need someone today. This morning. I've got a job this morning. I'll pay double rate. Grayson didn't say anything. He looked at the crack in his windshield that he also hadn't gotten around to fixing. Cash, the man added. The rent was due in 11 days. He was $400 short, and that was if nothing else broke between now and then, which it always did. The faucet this morning. Chloe's school trip fee that was coming up. The registration renewal on the truck. I can be there by 9, Grayson said. I need to be gone by noon. I can work with noon. What's the address? The address the man gave him was out on Route 9, up toward the foothills. 40 minutes, maybe a little more if the weather turned. Grayson looked at the sky through his windshield. It was already the color of old pewter, low and flat in a way that meant business, the kind of sky the weather apps always seem to underestimate. He called his regular client, the bathroom retile, apologized, rescheduled for Thursday. The man on the phone was irritated but not furious, which was the best outcome available. Then Grayson pulled out of his driveway and headed north on Route 9. He didn't know it yet, but Route 9 was also where Victoria Sterling's morning was ending. She had been awake for 31 hours by the time she left the Meridian Tower parking garage at 6:45 that morning, and the exhaustion was the particular kind that sits behind your eyes and makes everything slightly too bright, slightly too loud, like the world has been turned up a half notch past comfortable. The board meeting had started at 9 the previous morning and had run until past midnight. Most of it had been exactly what board meetings were, interminable, procedural, and tedious in the specific way that only becomes interesting when you understand what's actually happening underneath the surface. Victoria understood. She had founded Meridian Technologies at 22 with borrowed money and an idea that 3 other companies had already tried and failed to execute. She had made it work through a combination of timing, stubbornness, and the willingness to work hours that most people considered physically dangerous. By 28, she was on the cover of 2 financial magazines. By 30, she ran a company worth $11 billion and employed nearly 6,000 people across 4 continents. She had also, somewhere along the way, developed the very particular skill of knowing when someone in a room was lying to her. It wasn't mystical. It wasn't intuition in the woo-woo sense. It was pattern recognition built from a decade of watching people very carefully, from learning the specific micro-adjustments in posture and language that people made when they were managing information instead of sharing it. She had learned to read boardrooms the way certain people learn to read weather. Not perfectly, but reliably enough to know when something was coming. Something had been coming for 3 months. The quarterly audit numbers had looked right but felt wrong. Not wrong enough to catch immediately, not wrong in the places where auditors were trained to look, but wrong in the aggregate, in the way the numbers sat together, in the small, consistent variances that kept appearing in the infrastructure division's operating accounts. She had gone looking on her own time, quietly, without telling anyone what she was looking for, or why. What she found had taken her breath away. Not metaphorically. She had actually sat in her home office at 2 in the morning 3 weeks ago, reading through the documents she'd assembled, and had to consciously remind herself to inhale. 3 of her most senior executives, men she had hired, mentored, trusted with the architecture of the company she had built, had been quietly siphoning funds through a chain of shell accounts connected to a subsidiary they had created without her knowledge. The total over 18 months came to somewhere between $2 and $3 billion. The mechanism was sophisticated enough that it had gotten past internal audit for a year and a half. And the paper trail, if you looked at it from the right angle, if you looked at it the way they intended it to be looked at, pointed directly at Victoria. That was the part that kept her up at night. It wasn't just theft. It was a setup. Methodical, patient, and designed to detonate in a way that would obliterate her professionally and personally in one event. She had spent the last 3 weeks building her own counter record. Every transaction, every account number, every transfer documented and cross-referenced and saved to an encrypted drive that she carried on her person at all times and had not once connected to a company network or personal cloud account. The drive was in her jacket pocket right now. She had left the board meeting last night when she understood with cold clarity that the presentation of her findings had to happen on her own terms and through channels she personally controlled. Not inside that building, not where 3 of the people in that room had already compromised the internal systems against her. She needed federal investigators. She needed to move before they realized she had built the case. She had a contact at the FBI field office in the city. She had called him from a gas station payphone at 11:15 p.m. the night before, because she no longer trusted her cell phone, and he had agreed to meet her that morning at a location outside the city. She was 40 minutes from that location when the rain started. It didn't start gradually. The sky just opened up, the way it does sometimes in mountain country when a storm has been stacking up behind a ridgeline and finally tips over, and suddenly the road was a different road. Victoria turned her wipers to high and slowed down. She was not a nervous driver, but she was a sensible one, and Route 9 through the foothills had guardrails only on one side and no lighting, and a grade that made her brake more than she accelerated. She didn't see the other vehicle until its headlights were already filling her rearview mirror. It had come from somewhere behind her. She didn't know where. There had been no one visible when she last checked. And it was moving too fast for the road and the weather, the kind of fast that didn't make sense unless someone wasn't trying to get somewhere, but was trying to get to her. Her stomach dropped. She pressed the accelerator. The SUV's tires grabbed at the wet asphalt. The headlights behind her accelerated to match. She took the next curve faster than she should have and felt the rear of the vehicle step out slightly before the all-wheel drive pulled it back. The impact, when it came, was precise. Not a crash, not a collision. A specific controlled strike to the rear quarter panel, the kind designed to induce a spin on a wet road, the kind that said someone behind the wheel knew exactly what they were doing. She felt the SUV rotate, tried to countersteer, and then the guardrail was there, and the front corner of her vehicle hit it at an angle that launched her sideways and off the road. And then there was a terrible weightless second, and then the world became noise and glass and impact and nothing. Grayson was 8 miles north of town when he passed the guardrail. He almost didn't see it. The rain was horizontal by then, his wipers working as hard as they could and still barely keeping up, and he had slowed to 30 miles an hour on a road he normally took at 50. He saw the gap in the guardrail first, a crumpled section, fresh, the metal still catching light differently than the older panels around it. And then his headlights found the tire tracks veering off the edge. He stopped the truck. He sat there for 3 seconds with his hazard lights blinking and the rain hammering the roof. He did not think deeply about what to do. There was no lengthy internal debate, no careful weighing of risk against obligation. He just got out. The embankment was steep and wet, and he went down it half sideways, grabbing at exposed roots and rock, and the SUV came into view about 40 feet below the road. It had rolled, once, maybe twice, and come to rest against a cluster of trees with the driver's side facing up and the passenger side buried in the hillside. One wheel was still spinning slowly. Steam was coming from under the crumpled hood. The sound of water was everywhere, and when he got close enough he understood why. A drainage channel that ran parallel to the embankment had swollen from the storm, and water was already rising around the base of the vehicle. He got to the driver's door and pulled. Locked or jammed, he couldn't tell. He moved to the rear, found a window that had shattered in the roll, and cleared the remaining glass with his elbow without thinking about it, just doing the thing that needed doing, and then he was inside. She was suspended by her seatbelt, conscious but barely, her head at an angle that worried him immediately. Blood on her temple, matted into dark hair. The airbag had deployed and she had hit it. Her nose was bleeding, lips split. Her breathing was there but shallow. "Hey." He put his hand on her shoulder gently. "Hey, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened. They were an unusual color, not quite gray, not quite green, and they found his face with the specific focus of someone who is working very hard at staying present. "I hear you," she said. Her voice was wrecked, like someone had dragged it over gravel. "Are you hurt anywhere besides your head? Anything in your chest or spine?" "I don't—" She stopped, seemed to be doing an internal inventory. "My left shoulder and my ribs on the right. But I can feel my feet." "Okay, good. The water's rising. I need to get you out. Can you move your arms?" "Yes." "I'm going to cut your seatbelt. When I do, I need you to hold on to me and not let go, okay?" "Okay." A pause. Then, as if she'd just realized something important, "My jacket. There's a drive. We'll get the jacket. Hold on." He cut the belt with the folding knife he kept on his hip. She dropped and he caught her, which was harder than he expected. She was taller than she looked, and the awkward angle inside the vehicle meant he was half supporting her weight with one arm while trying to keep them both from sliding toward the rising water pooling at the low end of the cabin. "Can you help me push?" he said. "Yes." They went out through the shattered rear window together, Grayson first and then guiding her through. And when her feet hit the muddy ground, she swayed but didn't go down. He grabbed her jacket off the back seat through the window. She took it from him immediately, fumbled at the pocket, and only visibly relaxed when her hand closed around something inside it. "Okay," she said. "Okay. We need to get up to the road. My truck is—" That was when he heard the other vehicle, not coming down the road the way a normal driver would slow and stop when they saw the damage to the guardrail, coming down the embankment deliberately, with a flashlight sweeping ahead of them. Two men, both in rain gear, both moving with the kind of efficiency that had nothing to do with emergency response. Grayson stood very still and watched them for 3 seconds. They weren't moving toward the wreck with the uncertain urgency of people who had stumbled onto an accident. They were moving with purpose, checking the vehicle, then looking around, looking for her. The woman beside him had gone completely still. She had seen them too. "Those aren't rescue workers," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," he said. "They're not. They ran me off the road." He looked at her. In the rain and the half-dark, she was hard to read, but the fear in her voice was real. Not the shock fear of someone who'd just survived an accident, but something deeper and more specific. The fear of someone who knows exactly what's coming for them and why. "Is there somewhere we can go?" she said. "Anywhere away from the road?" He thought for 2 seconds. He knew this stretch of Route 9. He'd worked a job up here years ago on a property that backed up to the state forest. He knew which direction the trees ran, knew there was a service road about a quarter-mile east that the county used during fire season. "Yeah," he said. "Then we need to go right now." One of the men below them swept his flashlight up the embankment. The beam passed over them and moved on. In about 10 seconds, it was going to swing back, and when it did, "Right now," Grayson agreed, and they moved. They went east through the trees, fast as the ground allowed. The rain was still coming down, and it was both a curse and a cover. The sound of it was immense, drowning out their movement, but it also meant zero visibility past 15 feet and a forest floor that was half mud and half standing water. Victoria moved well. She was limping, her right side obviously giving her trouble, but she didn't complain and she didn't slow down beyond what the terrain required. Grayson set the pace, staying just ahead of her, trying to pick the clearest path through the undergrowth. "Who are they?" he said, keeping his voice low. "People who work for people who want what I'm carrying." She said it plainly, like it was a fact instead of something terrifying. "What are you carrying?" A pause. "Proof. Evidence of something very large and very illegal." Another pause. "My name is Victoria Sterling." He didn't recognize the name immediately, which said something about how much he followed financial news. "Is that supposed to mean something to me?" "Usually, yes." A short, surprise sound that might have been a laugh under different circumstances. "It doesn't matter right now. What matters is that I'm carrying evidence against some people who have a great deal to lose, and those men back there—" She stopped briefly, navigating a route system that crossed the path. "They're not going to give up when they don't find my body in the car." "So they expected to find your body?" "That's the safest assumption, yes." Grayson absorbed this while pushing through a stand of young pines that whipped back against his face and arms. Behind them, somewhere back through the rain, he could hear voices. Not words, just the indistinct sounds of communication. They hadn't been spotted yet, but spotted wasn't the only way to be found. Found was. "My truck is back up on the road," he said. "If they saw it, they saw it." He stopped walking for a second. "Then they have my plates." "Yes." She said it without apology, because there was nothing to apologize for, but she said it looking at him directly, which he appreciated. "I'm sorry. I didn't ask you to stop." "No," he said. "You didn't." He started walking again. Stopped. The service road was where he remembered it. A rutted gravel track that the county used once or twice a year to access the fire break that ran along the ridge. In dry weather, it was barely passable in a standard vehicle. Tonight, it was a river of mud with gravel somewhere underneath it. They stood at the edge of the tree line and looked at it. "This goes down toward Miller's Creek," he said. "There's a bridge, and on the other side is a farm road that connects back to Route 7. Route 7 is the long way around, but it comes out south of town. Your truck is gone." "My truck is gone." He was thinking through it. His phone was in his pocket, but using it felt like exactly the wrong move. He had no idea what kind of resources the people looking for Victoria had or what their capabilities were, and he was acutely aware that he was now deeply inside something he hadn't known existed 4 hours ago. "Is there someone you can call? Someone you trust?" "I had one person," she said. "I was going to him this morning, but I called him from a payphone last night, and if they've been monitoring his communications, then calling him from my phone is worse than useless. Significantly worse, yes." They stood in the rain for a moment. Somewhere behind them, the flashlight beams were moving through the trees in a way that suggested a methodical search rather than a random one. These were not amateurs. "My house," Grayson said. She looked at him. "It's the last place anyone would look for you." "I'm nobody. I'm a contractor with a truck and a bank account that's $400 short of rent. I have no connection to you and no connection to whatever this is." He said it matter-of-factly, not self-pitying, just accurate. "My daughter's school is in town. Her piano competition is at 2 p.m. today." "Your daughter say she needs to be at that competition. I told her I'd be there." He paused. "I'm going to need to figure out how to make that happen while also not getting either of us killed, which is a sentence I did not expect to say today." He looked at her. "Can you walk another 2 miles in this weather?" Victoria Sterling looked at him with those unusual gray-green eyes, with the blood still drying on her temple, and her ribs hurt, and her shoulder hurt, and her entire life detonating quietly around her in the dark. And she said, "Yes." "Then let's go," said. They made the service road in 20 minutes and followed it downhill for another 40, moving in the margins where the mud was slightly less deep, the rain beginning, finally, to ease off as the storm's leading edge moved east. Victoria said almost nothing during the walk. She was conserving energy deliberately. He could see that, the way an experienced person moves through difficulty, efficiently, without the performance of struggle. He found himself stealing looks at her in spite of himself. She was not what the word billionaire conjured, or at least not what it conjured for him. He had some vague, half-formed mental image of that category of person. Polished, remote, handling the world through intermediaries, untouched by rain and mud and the specific exhaustion of circumstances that refused to cooperate. She was none of that. She was a woman with cut hands and a swollen eye and mud to the knee, walking through a storm in the mountains at 7:30 in the morning, carrying something in her jacket pocket that people had tried to kill her for, and doing it with a straightforwardness that he found, against all reason, slightly impressive. "You said emergency construction job," she said eventually, when they were on flatter ground and could speak more easily. "What?" "Back at the car, when you were pulling me out. You said something about an emergency construction job and needing to be done by noon." She glanced at him. "I was in and out, but I heard that." "Yeah." He adjusted his grip on the small bag of tools he'd grabbed from his truck bed on the way down. Instinct, nothing planned. "Guy called me this morning, double rate, cash. I can't really afford to turn down double rate and cash." "But you turned around to help me instead." "There wasn't anyone else." She was quiet for a moment. "There were other cars. I remember seeing headlights." "Then they made a different call." Another silence. Then, "Why didn't you?" He thought about it honestly. The honest answer wasn't dramatic or particularly noble. It was just, he had a daughter who was 8 years old and was going to ask him what kind of person he was one day, in one way or another. And he had decided a long time ago that the answer to that question was going to have to hold up to scrutiny. That was it. That was the whole thing. "I have a kid," he said. "I don't want to explain the other choice." She seemed to be considering this. Then she nodded once, and they walked the rest of the way in companionable quiet. The farm road connected to Route 7 just past the Miller's Creek Bridge, and Route 7 was empty at that hour in that weather, and Grayson flagged down the first vehicle he saw. a farm truck going south, driven by a man named Earl, who had been doing the same morning run for 30 years and accepted the presence of two muddy, clearly had a difficult night strangers with the magnificent incuriosity of someone who had seen most things. He dropped them at the edge of Millhaven proper without asking a single question. From there, Grayson knew the streets. They moved through back ways, past the elementary school where Chloe was already sitting in her classroom, past the library, through the parking lot of the hardware store that didn't open until 9. The town was quiet, rain quiet, the specific hush of a morning after a storm where everyone is taking stock. His house was a 12-minute walk from where Earl had dropped them. He unlocked the front door and pushed it open, and they went in out of the cold. He watched Victoria Sterling walk into his small, imperfect house. The carpet seam, the peeling paint, the laundry rack with Chloe's school clothes still on it from yesterday, the kitchen with its faucet that was dripping again. And he waited for the reaction. Some flicker of discomfort or adjustment, something. She looked around once, carefully, the way she probably looked at most things. Then she sat down at the kitchen table without being invited to, and it wasn't rudeness. It was just someone who was very tired and who understood that certain formalities could be set aside given the context. "You need to look at your shoulder," he said. "Later. It could be dislocated." "It's not. I've had a dislocated shoulder before. It's bruised." She paused. "Your rib's on the right," she said, which was when he realized he'd been holding himself slightly wrong since the walk, protecting something without acknowledging it. He looked down at his side. "Yeah. You hit something on the embankment." "Rock. One of the bigger ones." He touched his side, felt the specific heat of bruising. "Not broken, probably. That's a medical assessment I'm comfortable with." He made coffee. It was automatic. He came home to an empty house, and he made coffee. He did it before he changed out of his wet jacket, before he looked at his phone, before he thought through the next logical step. He just did it because it was a thing that needed doing, and also because he needed a moment of normal. He set a mug in front of her. She wrapped both hands around it and drank without commenting on the quality, which was a kindness. "Okay," he said, sitting down across from her. "Tell me what we're dealing with." "All of it." She looked at him steadily. There was a calculation happening behind her eyes. He could see it, a quick, professional assessment of how much to share and with whom. He recognized it because it was the same look he'd seen from general contractors and project managers and building inspectors. The look of someone deciding how much of the truth the person across from them actually needed. Then something in her face settled, and she told him. She talked for 40 minutes. Grayson listened. He did not interrupt except once, when she got to the part about the shell accounts, and he wanted to make sure he understood the mechanism correctly. He asked a precise question. "So the transfers only look fraudulent from the outside if you have the original account structure to reference, but from the inside they're logged as standard operational transfers?" And she stopped and looked at him with a brief, recalibrating expression. "Yes," she said. "Exactly. And the trail that points to you, how is that constructed?" Authorization signatures. Several significant vendor contracts have my digital signature, forged, on approval documents for vendors that don't exist. The payment records run through those, and if you find the fraud before you find my counter documentation, every natural assumption is that I approve the fraudulent expenditures. How long does your counter documentation take to verify? The core of it, for someone who knows what they're looking at, maybe 2 hours. For investigators who need to build a chain of custody. She spread her hands. Days, potentially a week, during which time you'd be under arrest, most likely, or at minimum removed from the company pending investigation. Her voice stayed flat on this. Not emotionless, but controlled, the way you talk about something when you've already spent 3 weeks being afraid of it and have moved past the fear into something more useful. And by the time the investigation cleared me, the 3 of them would have completed the restructuring that consolidates control. The shares realign, the board composition shifts, and I become a former CEO with a damaged reputation who had the bad luck to look guilty. She said it like she was describing something that had happened to someone else. They've been very patient. They've been planning this for at least 18 months. Grayson turned his mug in his hands. "Why did you go alone this morning? Why not with security?" Because my head of security reports indirectly to a board subcommittee that 2 of the 3 men involved sit on. Her jaw tightened slightly. I didn't know how deep it went. I still don't. The only person I was certain of was Thomas, my FBI contact, and Thomas only because I met him through my brother, not through anything connected to Meridian. And you were going to him. I was going to him. And now? She looked down at the mug. Now I don't know if the men on that mountain found Thomas's name through my cell phone records. I don't know if they were waiting for me to contact him so they could intercept the evidence before it got there. A pause. I don't know anything with certainty right now. He looked at her for a moment. Except that the drive is still in your pocket. She put her hand over her jacket, a small, unconscious gesture. Yes. Then you still have the only move that matters. He stood up to refill his coffee. We just have to figure out how to get it to the right people without using any of the obvious channels. She looked up at him. We. He registered the word. He had used it without deciding to, and he stood at the counter thinking about what that meant. About Chloe, about the rent, about a day that had already been an exercise in things going wrong before 7 in the morning. He thought about the men on the embankment with their flashlights, moving with the specific competence of people who were paid to do bad things well. I'm already in it, he said. They have my plates. Whether I want to be involved or not stopped being relevant the second I went down that embankment. She looked at him for a long moment. He could not read what was happening behind those eyes. Not entirely, but there was something in it that was less composed than the rest of her. Something surprised, or maybe just unaccustomed, like a person realizing they have been handed something they didn't ask for and are not entirely sure what to do with. You should call your daughter's school, she said finally. Tell them she's to wait inside after the competition. Don't leave her with anyone she doesn't know. He looked at her. You pulled me out of a car. They have your plates. They will find your address within hours. She said it without apology again. Your daughter needs to be safe. He set down his coffee cup. He reached for his phone, and in the small, imperfect kitchen of a man who had started this morning, worried about a dripping faucet and being $400 short on rent, Grayson Reed called his daughter's school and left a message that changed the shape of the day completely. Outside, the storm had passed. Something else was just beginning. The message he left at the school was careful. He didn't say there was danger. He said there was a family situation and that Chloe should stay in the main office after her performance and wait for him personally. Not with a neighbor, not with a teacher's aide, not with anyone who came and said he'd sent them. With him. He'd be there. The woman on the school office line had the practiced patience of someone who fielded anxious parent calls all day. Of course, Mr. Reed, we'll make sure she knows. He hung up and stood at the kitchen counter for a moment with his hand still on the phone, running through the decision the way he ran through structural problems on a job, not looking for reassurance, just checking the load-bearing points, making sure nothing was going to give. Victoria was still at the table. She had taken off her jacket and draped it over the chair beside her, one hand resting on it loosely. She had cleaned the blood off her face using a paper towel from the roll he kept on the counter, done it efficiently and without asking, which he appreciated. The cut on her temple was small, maybe an inch, but it had bled the way head cuts do, dramatically and disproportionately. The swelling around her left eye was coming up now, a bruise spreading into the socket. She looked like someone who had been in a car wreck, which was accurate, but she held herself like someone who was managing a business problem, which was also accurate. First thing, Grayson said, pulling out the chair across from her and sitting down. They have my plate. How long before that becomes an address? If they have the resources I think they have, people on payroll who can run queries through DMV or law enforcement databases, maybe 2 hours, possibly less, and she paused. Probably less. So we can't stay here? No. He thought about that. His house. He'd lived here 3 years, which was longer than he'd lived anywhere since Chloe was born. It wasn't much, but it was where her drawings were on the refrigerator and where her piano sheet music was stacked on the bench, and where she knew which step on the stairs creaked and to avoid it in the morning so she wouldn't wake him. He felt a cold tightness in his chest that he recognized as anger, the specific kind that comes from having something threatened that you've worked hard to maintain. He put it aside. Anger was not useful right now. Is there anything in this house that leads to Chloe's school? He said. Victoria looked at him steadily. Her name? An enrollment notice? School calendar? There's a calendar on the fridge. She stood without being asked and went to the refrigerator. He watched her look at it. The calendar. A permission slip held up by a magnet. A photo of Chloe from last year's spring recital. She took the calendar down, checked the back, set it face down on the counter. Remove what you can, she said. It slows them down even if it doesn't stop them. She turned. Is there anyone who might come here looking for you normally? Someone who could walk in and be caught in the middle of this? My neighbor, Paulette. She has a spare key for emergencies. She sometimes checks in. Call her. Tell her not to come by today. Don't explain. She'll ask. Tell her you have family visiting. He called Paulette. She did ask. He said his sister was in town, which was a lie. He felt mildly bad about, but Paulette accepted it with the mild disappointment of someone who had been hoping for more interesting news and said she'd stay out of his hair. When he hung up, Victoria was looking at the photograph of Chloe on the refrigerator. How old is she? 8. What's she playing today? At the competition. He almost didn't answer because it felt like an odd question for the circumstances, and then he did because there was no reason not to. Chopin. Nocturne in E-flat major. She's been working on it since January. He paused. She's good, not just... He stopped, aware that every parent said their kid was good. She actually has something. Her teacher says she has feel for it, that it's different from technical skill. Victoria looked at the photo for another second and then looked at him. Then she needs to play today. That's what I'm working on. What? They left the house 20 minutes later with a bag Grayson packed in under 5 minutes. Dry clothes, his emergency cash from the tin in the kitchen drawer, $240, which was the entirety of it, a first aid kit, a phone charger, and a change of clothes for Victoria pulled from a box in the closet that held some of his ex-wife's things he'd never gotten around of donating. The fit would be wrong, but dry was better than correct. Victoria changed in the bathroom and came out in jeans that were 2 inches too short and a flannel shirt that was 2 sizes too big, and she looked, for the first time since he'd met her, like someone who might live in Millhaven. She'd pulled her hair back roughly. The bruise around her eye was darkening. You look like a different person, he said. Good. She tucked the drive into the inside pocket of the dry jacket he'd also given her. That's useful. They went out the back, through the small yard, over the fence into the alley that ran behind the row of houses. Grayson had used the alley 100 times, hauling lumber, moving equipment. He knew which yards backed up to it, which dogs would bark and which wouldn't. They moved quickly and without speaking, and came out 3 blocks east on a street he knew was a dead zone for traffic cameras because there'd been a public meeting about it last year when someone's car was broken into. His truck was gone. He'd known that going in. There was no truck. What he had instead was a problem. A woman with evidence that could bring down a corporate conspiracy, no safe communications, no vehicle, and a competition he'd promised his daughter he would attend in approximately 5 hours. He thought about resources the way he thought about a job site with half the materials missing. Not catastrophically, just practically. What was here? What could be sourced? What could be improvised? I know someone, he said. He's not going to ask questions. How sure are you? He's the guy who taught me how to frame a house. He's 63 years old and he distrusts banks, cell phones, and most forms of authority on principle. He's not going to ask questions. Frank DeLuca lived 8 blocks away in a house he had owned outright since 1987, and when Grayson knocked on his door at 9:15 in the morning, Frank opened it, looked at Grayson, looked at Victoria, looked at the general state of both of them, and said, "Coffee's hot." That was it. That was the entire greeting. They sat in Frank's kitchen, which smelled like sawdust and motor oil, and the particular combination that Grayson associated with the first years of learning his trade. Frank poured 3 mugs and sat down and waited, because Frank had learned 40 years ago that people who showed up looking the way Grayson and Victoria currently looked would explain themselves when they were ready and not before. "I need to borrow your truck," Grayson said, "and I need you to not know anything about why." Frank looked at him for a long moment. His face was the face of a man who had made a point of not asking questions about a lot of things, over 6 decades and had generally found the policy sound. "Keys are on the hook," he said. "I might not have it back until tonight. I've got nowhere to be." Grayson nodded. "And if anyone comes asking whether you've seen me—" "I sleep late," Frank said. "I didn't see anything this morning. I was asleep." Grayson looked at him. Frank looked back with the specific expression of a person who had decided something and was not going to revisit it. "Eat something before you go. Both of you look like hell." Victoria ate half a piece of toast and drank the coffee without comment, and Grayson thought, not for the first time, that she was either very adaptable or very practiced at being in situations that required it. Possibly both. They were in Frank's truck, a 2009 Silverado with a dented passenger door and a cracked dash that somehow still ran perfectly, and heading south on Route 7 when Victoria's thinking shifted visibly. He could see it happen. She'd been quiet for the first 10 minutes, looking out the window at the wet fields and the low gray sky, but the look on her face wasn't vacancy. It was work, processing. The same look, he imagined, that she wore through the board meetings she apparently lived inside. "I can't call Thomas from your phone," she said, "but I also can't wait indefinitely. Every hour I wait is an hour they're regrouping. What do they know right now? They know the accident didn't do what it was supposed to. They know I'm alive. They searched the embankment. They didn't find a body." She shifted in the seat, wincing slightly at her ribs. "They'll assume I have the drive. They'll assume I'm trying to reach someone. They'll be covering the obvious channels, my personal lines, my assistant's line, Thomas's office line if they've identified him." "You said you called him from a payphone." "Yes." "Did he call you back?" A pause. "No, we agreed I'd call again when I was close." "Then they may not know who he is." "They may not." She didn't sound certain. "But I have to assume they're working to find out. My phone history, even deleted, can be reconstructed. If they have someone inside law enforcement, do you think they do? I think they've had 18 months to prepare for exactly this scenario, and I'd be an idiot to assume they didn't cover that angle." She looked at him. "I need a secure way to reach Thomas, not a call. Something that can't be intercepted and can't be backtraced in the time it would take to act on it." Grayson drove in thought. The road ahead was clear. They were the only vehicle on this stretch of Route 7, and the sky was high and pale and washed out clean from the storm. "There's a law office in town," he said slowly, "on Carver Street. Family law mostly, but the man who runs it, his name is Arthur Wills. He did the paperwork when my wife and I separated. He's meticulous, and he doesn't talk." He glanced at her. "If there's a way to send something through legal channels, attorney to attorney, or through a law enforcement liaison that your FBI contact's office would take seriously, would that work?" She was quiet for a moment. "It would depend on whether Thomas's office had a protocol for receiving physical evidence through civilian legal counsel." Another pause. "But it's not a bad angle. If Wills can reach Thomas's office through official legal channels, it doesn't go through any line they're monitoring. And anything submitted through an attorney of record has a procedural weight that makes it harder to suppress. I can call Wills. He'll remember me." "Will he ask questions?" "Yes, he'll ask questions, but he's a lawyer. He keeps what he knows." She was looking at the road ahead now, and he could see the mental architecture assembling, the way someone builds a structure out of whatever materials are available when the standard materials are gone. "Okay," she said. "Call him." Arthur Wills sounded deeply unsurprised to hear from Grayson, which was either a professional affect or genuine unflappability, possibly both. He listened while Grayson gave him the minimum necessary information: a client in a time-sensitive legal situation, evidence that needed to reach a federal contact without going through compromised channels, and a request for a confidential meeting as soon as possible. "I have a 9:45, Wills said. "Can you move it?" "I'll see. Come to the back entrance on Canton Alley. Don't come through the main office." He hung up, and Grayson relayed this to Victoria, who nodded once and went back to looking out the window. They drove in silence for a while. Then she said, without looking at him, "The men on the mountain, did you get a clear look at them?" "Enough of a look. Why?" "I'm trying to understand which direction they came from, whether they were already on Route 9 or whether they picked me up from the parking garage. She paused. If they were waiting on the road, someone tipped them off to my route. The only people who knew I was leaving early were my assistant and my driver. You didn't use your driver this morning. No, I took my own vehicle. She finally looked at him, which means either my assistant mentioned my early departure to someone, or they were tracking my vehicle directly. GPS? My SUV has a factory tracker that the company fleet account manages. 3 people in operations have access to that system. Her jaw was tight. I didn't think to disable it. I didn't think they'd move this fast. They were watching you. They were watching everything. She looked back at the road. I underestimated the operational side. I knew what they were doing financially. I didn't fully account for what they were willing to do physically. He thought about the 2 men on the embankment again. The efficiency of their movement, the way they'd checked the wreck not with concern, but with purpose. These aren't executives who hired some muscle last minute, he said. No, this is planned infrastructure. Her voice stayed even. Whatever I walked into, they've been ready for it. That sat in the truck cab for a minute. How many people know the full scope of what's on that drive? He asked. Me? Now you, more or less. She glanced at him. Thomas? When he receives it? Nobody inside the company? No one I'd stake my life on. A pause. Which is the problem. Arthur Wills's back entrance was a plain gray door off Canton Alley between a dry cleaner and a plumbing supply store. Grayson knocked, and Wills opened it himself. Early 60s, wire-rimmed glasses, a man who looked like he'd been doing careful things carefully for a very long time. He looked at both of them without any visible alarm, which said something about the variety of states in which people apparently arrived at his back door. Come in. His office was the kind of office that accumulates over decades. Overloaded bookshelves, files and stacks that had their own organizational logic, a desk that had more paper on it than free space. He gestured them into chairs and sat down across from them and folded his hands. Tell me what you need, he said. Victoria told him. She was concise, more concise than she'd been with Grayson, which made sense because Wills needed the legal shape of it, not the full narrative. She told him there was physical evidence of significant financial fraud and a federal contact who was expecting to receive it, that the channels she'd planned to use were potentially compromised, and that she needed a legally credentialed path to get the evidence to that contact with a documented chain of custody that could not be challenged. Wills listened. He asked 3 questions: the name of her federal contact, the nature of the evidence, and whether she was currently the subject of any active legal proceedings. She answered all 3. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you understand that if I act as intermediary and the evidence is later contested, I become part of the chain of custody. I understand. And you're comfortable with that. If the evidence is what I know it to be, which it is, there's nothing to contest. He looked at her over his glasses with the specific expression of a man deciding whether to take someone at their word. He apparently decided yes. I'll contact Special Agent Thomas Reeve through the field office's legal intake channel, he said. I'll identify myself as legal counsel for a client with evidence related to an ongoing financial investigation and request an urgent, secure intake appointment. That process is documented and goes through official channels that are separate from his personal communication lines. He paused. It may take several hours. We have several hours, Grayson said. I'll need to hold the evidence here in a documented, secure manner until I can physically transmit it with proper chain of custody. He looked at Victoria. You understand this means releasing physical custody. She reached into her jacket pocket. Her hand hesitated for one small moment, barely visible, but Grayson saw it. And then she put the drive on his desk. She had been carrying it for 3 weeks. She had been carrying it through a car wreck and a night without sleep and a walk through a mountain storm. She had not put it down once. Handle it carefully, she said. Miss Sterling. He picked it up with gloved hands that he had produced from a desk drawer. This is what I do. They were back in Frank's truck and parked 2 blocks from Wills's office by 10:40. And now came the hardest part. Waiting. Grayson had done a lot of waiting on job sites, waiting for materials, waiting for inspectors, waiting for decisions from clients who couldn't make up their minds. He was reasonably good at it. He had learned that waiting was not the same as doing nothing, It was a specific activity that required its own discipline. Victoria was less good at it. She lasted about 15 minutes before she said, "Tell me about Chloe." He looked at her. She was looking straight ahead through the windshield at the wet, empty street, and her voice had the quality of someone making a deliberate choice to direct her mind somewhere useful. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to say?" He thought about it. "She's funny. Not in the way kids are funny when they're performing for adults. She's actually funny. She has this dry delivery, says things that shouldn't be that funny in a voice like she's stating facts, and then looks at you like she's not sure why you're laughing." He paused. "She's been playing piano since she was 5. Her teacher, Mrs. Hannigan, who I have a complicated relationship with because she once told me that Chloe's musical development was being held back by inadequate home practice time, which, fair, but also you're working 2 jobs. Also, I'm working 2 jobs, so..." He looked out the window. "Mrs. Hannigan aside, Chloe gets it in a way I don't entirely understand. I can't play anything. My ex-wife played violin in high school and stopped. But Chloe sat down at a piano at age 5 like it was something she already knew how to do and just needed to remember." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "My mother played piano," she said. "I never learned. She tried to teach me when I was 6, and I was impatient, and she was tired, and it didn't take." A pause. "I think about that sometimes. What I would have had if I'd paid more attention." "It's not too late," he said. "Plenty of people learn as adults." She made a small sound. Not dismissive, more like the idea was genuinely unfamiliar to her, like time had been allocated so completely to other purposes that the concept of learning something simply for its own sake had fallen off the map. "What was it like?" she said. Raising her alone. It was a direct question, and he gave it a direct answer. "Hard. The logistics are hard. There's nobody to cover when something comes up. Nobody to say, 'You handle this one, I'm done.' Everything is you. Every decision, every bad day she has, every time something breaks or she's sick at 3 a.m. It's always you." He turned the empty coffee cup he'd brought from Frank's house. "But also..." He stopped. "She's mine. All of it is mine. The good stuff is entirely mine, and I don't have to share it with anyone, which sounds selfish but isn't. I know exactly who she is because I was there for all of it. I didn't miss any of it." "You didn't have a choice about being there." "I made choices that kept me there," he said. "That's not nothing." She looked at him for the first time in a while. He wasn't sure what she was looking for or whether she found it, but whatever the examination was, she ended it without comment and looked back at the street. "I've been running a company since I was 22, she said after a while. "I know every metric. I know every quarterly report. I know what every department is doing and why. I have 17 people who report directly to me, and I know their professional histories and their performance records and what they're likely to do under pressure." She was speaking slowly, like she was arriving at something rather than stating it. "I don't know my neighbor's name. I haven't called my brother since February." She paused. "I had a relationship end 2 years ago because he said I treated the relationship like a line item I hadn't gotten around to optimizing, and I told him that was an unfair characterization, and then I thought about it for a week and realized he was completely right." "Did you call him?" "I sent an email." He didn't laugh, but it was close. "That's..." he started. "I know," she said. "I know exactly what that is." The street outside was quiet. Somewhere 2 blocks over, a delivery truck was backing up with the slow beeping that meant the driver was being careful. "Why did your marriage end?" she said. Not intrusively, more like someone who had given something and was aware they had given it. He turned the coffee cup again. "She left. About 4 years ago. Chloe was 4. He said it plainly. She was honest about it. She said she'd thought she wanted the life we were building, and she tried for 4 years to want it, and she couldn't make herself feel what she didn't feel. She's not a bad person. She just wanted something different and stayed too long hoping she'd change." A pause. "She moved to Portland. She sends Chloe birthday presents and calls on holidays, and I think she feels guilty, which is probably appropriate but also doesn't help anyone." "Does Chloe ask about her?" "Less than she used to. She asked me once why some families had 2 parents and some had 1, and I told her that families came in different shapes, and ours was shaped the way it was, and she thought about it for about 30 seconds and then asked if she could have ice cream, which I took as a sign she had processed it adequately. Children are more resilient than we think. Sometimes, he said, and sometimes they're exactly as fragile as you think, and you don't find out until it comes out sideways later. He looked at the clock on the dash. 11:20. The competition was at 2. I need her to be okay, he said, and it came out simpler and more direct than he intended, just the unadorned fact of it. She will be, Victoria said. He looked at her. I mean it. Not just... She stopped. She has a father who got out of a warm truck in a rainstorm and went down a wet embankment because someone needed help, and she doesn't know that story yet, but she will. Her voice was steady. Kids like that are going to be okay. His phone buzzed on the dash. He picked it up. A text from an unsaved number. Arthur Wills used a dedicated office cell for this kind of communication. Contact made. Intake appointment confirmed for 2 p.m. Agent requests both of you present if possible for preliminary verification. He showed it to Victoria. She read it twice. Then she sat back in the seat and let out a breath. Slow, controlled, the breath of someone who has been holding something tight for a long time and is just beginning to let the grip ease. 2 p.m., she said. Same time as the competition, he said. She turned to look at him. He looked back. There are 2 federal field offices in this county, she said. Which one handles intake? He didn't know. He typed back to Wills asking for the address. The reply came in 40 seconds. Intake location, Federal Building, 1140 Archer Boulevard. That's the South Annex. He pulled up the geography in his head. The Federal Building on Archer was a 12-minute drive from the Millhaven Civic Center, where the youth piano competition was held every year in the main auditorium. He looked at the clock on the dash again, thought through timing. I can do both, he said. Grayson, Wills is meeting us there with the evidence and chain of custody documentation. I deliver you to the intake, make sure you're inside and it's handled, and then I drive to the Civic Center. He was already counting the minutes in his head, building the schedule the way he built a workday. Tight but achievable. No slack in it, which was the only kind of schedule he knew how to run. It works. It's 12 minutes between them. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite categorize. Not skepticism. She was clearly doing the same time math he was and arriving at the same conclusion. Something else. You could just go to the competition, she said quietly. Wills can bring me. You've already done... I want to make sure you're inside, he said. I want to see it happen. She held his gaze for a moment. Why? He thought about Chloe asking him what kind of person he was, in all the ways children ask that question without actually asking it, and he thought about the answer he was always trying to build. Because I started it, he said. I want to finish it. Outside, the sky was clearing slowly from the west, pale winter sun beginning to find the wet streets. Grayson started Frank's truck. They were 3 blocks from the Federal Building on Archer when the black SUV pulled out of the parking structure on their left and fell in behind them. Grayson saw it in the mirror. He didn't say anything immediately. He took the next right, a turn he hadn't planned, and watched to see what the SUV did. It took the right. Company, he said. Victoria turned her head slightly the way someone does when they don't want to be seen looking. Black SUV, 2 occupants. Yeah. How long? Since we turned off Merchant Street, maybe longer. He kept his speed even, unhurried, the way you drove when you wanted to look like you hadn't noticed. We're 4 minutes from Archer. If they're ahead of us on the intake appointment, they won't move until we're away from the Federal Building. Too visible. She was thinking out loud, her voice level. They want the drive. They want it before it goes inside. So they'll move between here and the entrance. Yes. He ran the street layout in his head. He'd done a plumbing job 2 years ago at a building near the Federal Annex. He knew the block. He knew there was a loading dock on the east side of the building that faced a one-way service alley, and he knew that the main entrance on Archer had a security checkpoint visible from the street with a permanent federal officer post. If I pull directly into the main entrance drop-off, right up to the security post, and you get out there, they can't touch you, he said. Not in front of a federal security post with cameras. What about you? I'll be fine. That's not an answer. It's the answer I have. He checked the mirror. The SUV was 2 cars back, patient. I'm going to take the long route to Archer. Come at it from the north, so we're heading directly toward the security post entrance. You get out, you walk straight in. Don't run. Running draws attention from the wrong people. Walk fast and walk straight. Wills won't be there yet. He said 2 p.m. and it's... She checked the clock. 1:47. Then you wait inside for him. At a federal intake office with officers in the building. He glanced at her. You'll be okay. She looked at him, and he could see the argument she was deciding not to make. Something about him, about what happened after she walked through that door. She folded it away. Okay, she said. He took 3 more turns, adding 2 minutes to the route, and the SUV followed all 3. Not even trying to hide it anymore. They were close enough now to the endpoint that subtlety had stopped mattering to whoever was in that vehicle. Grayson felt the particular cold focus that came to him in moments that required precision. He'd felt it before, on bad job sites when something structural was failing and there was no time to think, only to act correctly. He came onto Archer from the north, heading south, and the federal building's main entrance was 160 feet ahead. The security post visible, an officer in uniform standing outside, 2 cameras mounted above the reinforced glass doors. Get ready, he said. The SUV accelerated behind them. Grayson accelerated more, closing the distance to the entrance fast, and brought Frank's truck to a hard stop directly in front of the security post, close enough that the officer outside took a step toward them with his hand raised. Grayson put it in park and looked at Victoria. Go. She was already opening the door. She got out, and she did what he'd told her. She walked fast and she walked straight, toward the officer, toward the doors, her hand going into her jacket for the drive. Even though it wasn't there, it was with Will's, and she said something to the officer that Grayson couldn't hear, but whatever it was enough. Because the officer's posture changed immediately, and he moved to meet her and they went inside together. The black SUV had stopped 20 feet behind him. The officer at the post was on his radio. Grayson sat with both hands on the wheel and did not move for about 30 seconds, which was as long as it took for a second officer to emerge from the building and for the SUV behind him to make the obvious calculation that the moment had closed. He watched it in the mirror. It sat there for another 10 seconds, then pulled out around him and continued south down Archer at a controlled, unremarkable speed. Just a vehicle changing its mind about where it needed to be. Grayson let out a breath. His hands were entirely steady, which surprised him until it didn't. This was what happened under pressure. Had always happened. The stillness that came when things were actually critical. It was the low-grade anxiety of ordinary days that made him grip things too hard. He pulled away from the entrance and found a parking structure 2 blocks over and sat in it for a minute, recalibrating. 1:49 p.m. The competition started at 2. He was 11 minutes away. He put Frank's truck in reverse. Quote, the Millhaven Civic Center was a building that had been built in 1974 and renovated just enough in 2009 to make it look like it was trying. The auditorium held 400 people, and on competition days it filled to maybe half that. Parents and grandparents and younger siblings who didn't want to be there spread across the red-upholstered seats with the specific patience of people who were waiting for the one performance that mattered to them personally. Grayson came in through the side entrance at 2:04, still wearing the clothes he'd had on since yesterday with a jacket over them, carrying nothing, and he found a seat in the 5th row on the aisle before he'd fully located Chloe on the stage. There were 12 children performing. Chloe was 7th. He sat down and let the auditorium settle around him. The smell of the place, old fabric and floor polish and someone nearby wearing too much perfume, was the specific smell of every school event he'd attended in the past 3 years, and it hit him like something physical. He was here. He had made it. That was the whole thing. The first 6 performances passed with the particular variable quality of children playing classical piano, some technically proficient and emotionally absent, one small boy who played from memory with his eyes squeezed shut like he was trying to block out the universe, 2 who made identical hesitations in their third measures that suggested Mrs. Hannigan had drilled the same piece into them both with the same emphasis. Grayson watched and heard almost none of it. He was coming down from the morning in the slow, uneven way that adrenaline left the body, not all at once, but in stages, leaving behind a tiredness that sat in the muscles and behind the eyes. Then Chloe walked out. She was wearing the blue dress that matched the bow he'd found on the bathroom counter that morning, and she walked to the piano bench with the specific seriousness that she applied to things that mattered to her. She didn't look for him in the audience. He had told her once to not look for him during performances because it broke concentration, and she had taken this to heart with the literalness that she applied to most things she decided were worth taking seriously. She sat, she adjusted the bench, she looked at the keys for a moment. Then she played. He didn't know music well enough to evaluate what she was doing technically. That was Mrs. Hannigan's domain. What he knew was what he always knew when he watched her play, which was that it cost her something. That it wasn't a performance in the way some of the other kids performed, careful and correct and uninhabited. She was inside the music in a way he recognized from people who were genuinely good at something, the total absorption of someone for whom the activity and the self have become temporarily the same thing. The nocturne ran 4 minutes and change. Grayson sat very still for all of it. When she finished, there was a beat of the audience catching up with itself, and then the applause was warm and real rather than just polite. And Chloe stood from the bench and took a small, slightly awkward bow that had clearly not been practiced enough. And he could see, even from the 5th row, the way she tried not to smile too much and failed. He was on his feet applauding before he'd made any conscious decision to stand. The woman next to him, someone's grandmother, he thought, gave him a sideways look that was approximately half judgment and half amusement, and he sat back down while the next child walked out. He texted the school office. "I'm in the auditorium. Please let her know." He found her in the hallway outside the auditorium 20 minutes later, after the last performance and the judge's deliberation period that the parents spent in the lobby pretending not to be anxious. She came around the corner with her sheet music under her arm and her bow slightly crooked from the performance, and she stopped when she saw him. 8-year-olds had a particular economy of expression. Joy and relief didn't announce themselves with fanfare. They arrived in the way the body changed its posture, the way a held tension released in the shoulders and the face. Chloe looked at him and the held tension released. She walked up to him. He crouched down. "You came," she said. "I told you I'd be here. You were late. 4 minutes. You missed the first 6 performances. I didn't miss yours." She considered this with the judicial precision she applied to most things. "You look like you slept in your car." "I had a complicated morning." What happened? He thought about the embankment and the rain and the men with flashlights and Frank's kitchen and Arthur Wills's gloved hands and the black SUV on Archer Boulevard. "Work stuff," he said. "I'll tell you when you're older." She gave him the look that said she knew she was being managed and had decided to allow it for now. Then she said, "I think I played the second movement better than I did in practice." "You did. Mrs. Hannigan is going to say I rushed the transition." "Did you?" A pause. "Maybe slightly. Then you'll fix it for next time." She's going to say it very specifically. Chloe's voice took on a slightly pained quality. "With the face. The face is how you know she noticed. That means she was listening." Chloe appeared to process this. Then, "There's a woman outside who's been asking the front office about you." He went still. "What woman?" "The front desk lady said a woman came in about 10 minutes ago and asked if you'd arrived yet and said she was a family friend." Chloe looked at him with the careful eyes that did not miss much. "We don't have a lot of family friends." His pulse did a single hard beat, then his phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out. A text from Arthur Will's office number. "All in order. Agent Reeve has the evidence and chain of custody. Your name will be on the preliminary witness record. Miss Sterling wanted me to tell you. She's outside your daughter's auditorium. Said you'd understand why." He stood up slowly. "Is she tall?" he said. "With dark hair. Her eye is bruised." Chloe looked at him with the expression she reserved for moments when the adult world was being genuinely confusing. "Yes. She looks like she was in an accident." "She was." He took Chloe's hand. "Come on." Victoria was standing just inside the Civic Center's glass front doors, still in Frank's flannel shirt and the too short jeans, the bruise around her left eye in full color now, a bottle of water from the vending machine in her hand that she appeared to have purchased and then not opened. She was watching the parking lot with the habitual alertness that he recognized as someone who had not yet allowed themselves to stop watching. She turned when they came through the lobby doors, and he saw her clock Chloe immediately. Not with surprise, but with something careful and deliberate, like someone consciously deciding how to hold their expression. Chloe looked up at her with zero self-consciousness. "You have a black eye." "I do," Victoria said. "How did you get it?" "Car accident, this morning." Chloe looked at her father. He could see the mathematics happening. This woman, his complicated morning, the message to wait in the main office, the look on his face that he was apparently not as good at neutralizing as he thought. "Is she the work stuff?" Chloe said. "More or less," he said. "You should put ice on that," Chloe told Victoria. "I know, I haven't had a chance. There's a vending machine in the lobby that has those cold canned drinks. If you hold one on it, it helps." She said it with the authority of someone who had applied this remedy to her own bumps. "I fell off the swing set at school in September and Mr. Patterson let me hold a Coke can on my knee for like 15 minutes. Victoria looked at her with something that was not quite amusement and not quite something else, and was somewhere in the complicated space between them. "That's a good idea," she said. "I'm Chloe." "I know, I'm Victoria." Chloe appeared to file this away. Then, apparently satisfied that the introductions were complete and the injury was being handled, she looked at her father. "Did I win?" "They haven't announced it yet." "Oh." She glanced back into the lobby where several other children and parents were gathered near a table. "I should probably go back in there." "Yeah, go ahead." She went. They both watched her navigate back through the lobby crowd with the particular confidence of someone who knew where they were going. "She's extraordinary," Victoria said quietly. "I know." He said it without performance, just the flat, certain fact of it. They stood there for a moment. Outside, the afternoon sky was clearing further, the last of the storm's gray giving way to pale winter blue. "The intake went well?" he said. "Thomas was already there when I went in. I think Wills's call through legal channels moved it faster than a direct call would have." She turned the water bottle in her hands. "He's good, calm. The kind of agent who doesn't react much to what he's hearing, which is either very professional or very alarming." A pause. "In this case, I think it was professional. He asked the right questions. He understood the mechanism without having to have it explained twice." Her voice was steady, but he could hear underneath it the faint quality of someone who has been operating at maximum for a very long time and is only now, in this specific moment, beginning to feel the full weight of it. It's going to take days, maybe a week, for the full investigation to build. But the chain of custody is established, and he has everything. "And the people who ran you off the road?" Thomas was very interested in that specifically. A pause. "Apparently this isn't the first time something adjacent to this has happened with the names on that drive." She looked at him. "I wasn't the first person they tried to silence. I was just the first one who had the evidence secured before they moved." He absorbed this. "How do you feel?" She seemed briefly surprised by the question, the directness of it, the way he asked it without preface. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I've been running on the same gear since yesterday morning. I haven't caught up with how I feel." She looked out at the parking lot. "Ask me in a week." He nodded. That was a reasonable answer. His phone buzzed, a number he didn't recognize. He looked at it for a moment, then answered. "Grayson Reed." The voice was male, measured, with the specific cadence of someone accustomed to controlling the pace of conversations. "My name is Daniel Marsh. I think you know something about why I'm calling." He didn't recognize the name. He looked at Victoria. She saw his face, and her expression sharpened. "Who is it?" He put it on speaker, low volume. "I don't know your name," Grayson said. "That's all right. We haven't been formally introduced, but you've been very helpful to someone I've been trying to reach, and I'd like to discuss a few things with you directly." A pause, carefully timed. "I understand you're a man who's had some financial difficulties recently. Rent coming due, truck repairs, a daughter and private music lessons." The specific coldness that came into Grayson's chest was not fear. It was the particular feeling of realizing exactly how much someone had been watching. "I'm listening," he said. His voice gave nothing. "I'm prepared to make those difficulties disappear entirely. Not a loan, a payment. Enough to cover everything you owe and significantly more. Enough to establish a real future for you and your daughter." Another pause. "All I need from you is information about where Miss Sterling is right now and whether she has retained any copies of certain materials." Grayson looked at Victoria. She was watching him with her face entirely still. "That's a generous offer," Grayson said. "I think so." Marsh's voice was pleasant, the pleasantness of someone who made offers like this regularly and had learned that pleasantness reduced resistance. "You've been put in a very difficult position through no fault of your own. I'm simply offering a way out of it." "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How did you get this number?" A brief pause. So brief most people wouldn't catch it. Grayson caught it. "We have resources." "Right." He kept his voice conversational, neutral, the voice he used with difficult clients. "And the men you sent up the mountain this morning, were those resources too?" The pleasantness shifted slightly. Not gone, but recalibrated. "I don't know what you're referring to." "Sure you don't." Grayson leaned against the wall. "Here's my counteroffer. I don't have any information about Miss Sterling's location. I don't know anything about any materials. I was a contractor who stopped at an accident on Route 9 this morning and helped a woman out of a crashed vehicle, and then I came to my daughter's piano competition, which she played very well." He paused. "If you try to contact me again, I'm going to add your number to the preliminary witness record that an FBI special agent is currently building. Have a good afternoon." He ended the call. The lobby behind them had a burst of sound, applause, a child's name announced, something being decided about who played best. Grayson stood very still for a moment, looking at his phone. "Marsh," Victoria said. "Daniel Marsh is the CFO. He's one of the three. He called me directly." "Which means they're rattled." Her voice was not triumphant. It was analytical. "Rattled people make direct moves. If they were confident they could contain this through Thomas's office or through the investigation process, he wouldn't be calling a contractor in Mill Haven." She looked at him. "You shook them. We shook them." She looked at him for a moment with that recalibrating expression he was beginning to recognize, the one where she was adjusting her model of the situation and didn't entirely hide that she was doing it. "Grayson?" Her voice was different, still controlled, but different. "If they have your number, they have enough to find you. Chloe's school, your home, I know. You can't go back to your house tonight, not until I know." He said it without heat. "I'm already thinking about it." The lobby doors opened and Chloe came back through them at speed, which was the particular speed of someone who had news they were physically incapable of delivering at a normal pace. "Second place," she announced. "I got second place. Emily Pierce got first, which is honestly fine because Emily has been playing for 3 more years than me and Mrs. Hannigan is going to point that out, but also..." She held up a small bronze-colored ribbon. "I got a ribbon, and there's a plaque for the school, and the judges wrote comments, and the judge, with the gray hair who always wears the green tie, said," she was consulting a small folded card, "that my phrasing was emotionally mature for the student's age, which I'm pretty sure means he liked it even though he said the technical precision needed work." She looked up from the card with an expression that was working hard to be measured about the whole thing and not quite managing it. "Emotionally mature for the student's age," Grayson said. "That's real." "I know." She folded the card carefully. Then she looked at Victoria. "Did you hear me play? From out here?" Victoria glanced at the doors which had been closed. "No, I'm sorry. I was outside." Chloe considered this with the seriousness of an 8-year-old deciding whether to be disappointed. "I'll play it for you sometime," she said. "If you want." Victoria looked at her. Something happened in her face that she didn't try to control or redirect, and Grayson saw it clearly. A small, unguarded thing, the kind that happened when someone was caught off guard by something simple. "I'd like that," Victoria said. "Okay." Chloe tucked the ribbon into her sheet music. "Are we going home now?" Grayson looked at Victoria. Victoria looked back at him. "Change of plans," he said to Chloe. "We're going to Frank's for a while." Chloe absorbed this with the adaptability of a child who had grown up in a household where plans were frequently amended by circumstances. Does Frank have food? I'm hungry. Frank always has food. Okay. She started walking toward the exit like the decision had been made and required no further discussion, which in her mind it had, and it didn't. Grayson fell in beside her. Victoria came with them. Frank was in the kitchen when they got there, making soup from what appeared to be every vegetable currently in his refrigerator, and he received all three of them. Grayson, a bruised woman in clothes that didn't fit her, and an 8-year-old carrying a ribbon and a piano competition card, with the same magnificent unflappability he'd shown that morning. "You're staying for dinner," he said. It was not a question. "We might need to stay the night," Grayson said. Frank stirred the soup. "Couch folds out. There's a cot in the storage room." He looked at Chloe. "You like vegetable soup?" "I like it if there's bread," Chloe said. "There's bread." "Then yes." Frank pointed at the table with the wooden spoon. They sat. The kitchen was warm from the stove and smelled like soup and old house and the faint machine oil that seemed woven into the walls of the place after decades of Frank working in the adjacent garage. Victoria sat at the table and put both hands around a glass of water Frank had set in front of her without asking, and she looked at the kitchen, at the cluttered walls and the old calendar and the soup pot and Chloe arranging her ribbon and competition card on the table in a particular order, and Grayson watched her look at it. He saw the moment it hit her, the way it hit him sometimes when he was too tired to keep the awareness at a distance, that this was what ordinary looked like, real and imperfect and entirely itself, and that it was not nothing. It was, in many ways, the whole thing. Chloe looked up from her ribbon and noticed Victoria looking at it. "You can read the judge's card if you want," she offered. "The comments are pretty good." Victoria picked it up carefully. She read it. She set it back down. "The judge was right," she said. "About the emotional maturity part or the technical precision part?" "Both," Victoria said, "but especially the first one." Chloe appeared to find this an adequate assessment. She went back to arranging her things. Grayson's phone lit up on the table. He turned it over. A text from Thomas Reeves' personal number. Wills must have shared it. 3 warrants issued as of 5 p.m. Marsh, Holloway, Dung. Travel restrictions in place. You and Miss Sterling will need to provide formal statements tomorrow. Can arrange secure location. Stay where you are tonight and confirm address for protective detail. He read it twice. Then he showed it to Victoria. She read it and sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "It's moving," Grayson said. "It's moving." She let out a breath. 18 months they spent building that trap. It took 17 hours to start taking it apart. 17 hours and 1 car wreck. She looked at him. "And 1 man who didn't drive past." He looked back. Across the table, Chloe was explaining to Frank the specific fingering she had used in the second movement, using the edge of the table as a keyboard, and Frank was listening with the complete attention of someone who found things genuinely interesting regardless of whether he had any prior investment in the subject. It had been a very long day. It had started with a dripping faucet and a phone call he almost didn't take, and it was ending in Frank's warm kitchen with soup on the stove and a federal investigation in motion and his daughter demonstrating piano technique on a table. Victoria was watching Chloe too. "She really will play for me sometime," she said quietly. Not a question this time. More like something she was deciding was true. "Yeah," Grayson said. "She will." Outside, the last of the winter light was leaving the sky, and the night was coming in clear and cold and entirely without storm. The protective detail arrived at Frank's house at 8:15 that evening. 2 agents in a gray sedan, professional and quiet, who introduced themselves briefly and then took up positions that managed to be both visible and unobtrusive. Agent Reeve had clearly briefed them well. They didn't come inside. They didn't ask questions. They were simply there, which was the specific comfort of knowing that the perimeter of a situation had been professionally defined. Chloe watched them from Frank's living room window with unconcealed interest. "Are those police?" she asked. "Federal agents," Grayson said, "because of the work stuff." "Because of the work stuff." She looked at them for another moment. "The one on the left is standing really still, like abnormally still." That's training. It looks uncomfortable. She pulled away from the window with the verdict delivered and went back to the fold-out couch where Frank had set her up with a blanket and the remote control, which in Chloe's hierarchy of important objects ranked somewhere just below her piano and just above most other things. Grayson stood at the window a moment longer. The night outside was clear and cold, and the street was quiet, in the way streets got quiet when something had been resolved and the tension had moved elsewhere. He didn't feel resolved. He felt the particular afterstate of a day that had taken everything available and spent it, the bone-level tiredness that came not from physical work alone, but from sustained alertness, from hours of reading situations and making quick decisions in conditions that did not allow for the luxury of being wrong. He was also acutely aware that tomorrow was not going to be simpler than today. The warrants were issued but not yet executed on all three. The investigation was moving, but investigations moved at their own pace regardless of urgency. And Victoria Sterling, who was currently in Frank's bathroom with the door closed, having finally accepted the first aid kit and a hot shower, was going to walk back into a world tomorrow that had been significantly rearranged while she was in it. He was trying to figure out exactly where that left him when Frank appeared from the kitchen with 2 mugs and handed one over without comment. "Coffee at 9 p.m., Grayson said. "You're not sleeping tonight anyway." Frank settled into his chair. "Might as well be awake on purpose." He wasn't wrong. Grayson took the mug and sat. They were quiet for a moment in the way 2 people were quiet when they'd known each other long enough that silence didn't require filling. Frank had been in Grayson's life for 11 years, since Grayson was 21, and showing up at job sites, knowing almost nothing and needing to know everything fast. Frank had taught him the trade with the specific patience of a man who believed that a thing worth doing was worth doing until it was done right. And he had never once made Grayson feel stupid for not knowing things he hadn't been taught yet, which was a rarer quality than it should have been. "You going to tell me what happened today?" Frank said. "Some of it. Some of it's fine." So Grayson told him the outline, the crash, the drive, the men on the embankment, the evidence, the intake. He left out the specifics he didn't need to put in Frank's house. Frank listened the way he listened to structural problems, without interruption, without visible alarm, processing. When Grayson finished, Frank drank his coffee. Then, "The woman. She's somebody." "Victoria Sterling." Frank's eyebrows moved slightly. "The tech company." "You know her?" "I read the financial news." "Old habit." He looked toward the hallway. "Her company's been in the papers. Some governance issues." A pause. "I didn't connect the dots until you said her name just now. How bad does it look from the outside?" "From the outside, it looks like a company with some internal disputes that management is handling quietly." Frank set down his mug. "Nothing that would tell you someone tried to kill the founder this morning." "That's the point." Grayson turned the mug in his hands. "If it works the way they designed it, she gets removed, gets arrested, and the story that reaches the public is the story they built. By the time the truth catches up, the structure of the company has already changed. And now? And now the structure doesn't change, and the story that reaches the public is the actual one." Frank was quiet for a moment. "Because you stopped." "Because I stopped." "Because you stopped," Frank said again, not as a compliment, just as a statement of the thing being looked at directly. Then he picked up his coffee and said nothing more about it, which was Frank's way of saying everything necessary had been said. Victoria came out of the hallway 20 minutes later looking like a different person, cleaner, the bruise more prominent now against washed skin, wearing the same borrowed clothes, but somehow wearing them differently. She had that quality some people had after they'd been through something and come out the other side still standing, a kind of stripped-down clarity, like everything non-essential had been burned off. She looked at Chloe, who had fallen asleep on the fold-out couch with the television still on at low volume, and she stopped for a moment. "She went out fast," Grayson said. "How does she do that? Just decide to sleep and sleep?" "She's 8. She doesn't carry the day with her yet." Victoria looked at Chloe for another second and then came to sit in the other chair, the one across from where Grayson had been. Frank, with his perpetual social radar, found a reason to be in the kitchen. "Thomas called while I was in there," she said, her voice low enough to not carry. The warrants were executed on Holloway and Dung this evening. Marsh's, she paused. His attorney filed an emergency injunction. He's still at large technically, but his passport is flagged and his accounts are frozen. She said this flatly, not satisfied, not relieved. It's the slowest part. The legal process takes the time it takes. Holloway and Dung in custody is not nothing. No, it's not nothing. She looked at her hands, which she'd wrapped around a glass of water. The knuckles on her right hand were scraped from the wreck. She'd cleaned them, but the rawness was still there. I keep waiting to feel something definitive about it. Some clear sense of, it's over, or it worked, or... She stopped. It doesn't feel the way I thought it would. It just feels like the next thing that has to happen. The feeling catches up later, Grayson said. Does it? It does. Give it a few days. He looked at the television. When I finished the job that kept us from losing this house, not this house, the one before, I had been working toward it for 3 months. Figured I'd feel something significant when the check cleared. I sat in the parking lot of the bank for about 20 minutes waiting for the feeling, and it didn't really come. Just the next thing. That's not particularly reassuring. Not meant to be, just accurate. She looked at him. There was something in the way she looked at him that had been gradually changing throughout the day. From the first careful assessment in the wrecked vehicle, through the tactical partnership of the morning, into something that had fewer edges. Not comfortable exactly. Something that was still figuring out its own shape. I owe you more than I can articulate, she said. You don't owe me anything. I do, and the fact that you'd say that is... She stopped. Started again. I've dealt with people for 10 years whose every action was calibrated to what it would earn them. Every favor, every alliance, every apparent generosity. I can see the ledger in people's interactions. I'm very good at it. A pause. I couldn't find a ledger in you all day. Not once. I don't keep one. I know. She said it like the concept was both simple and, to her, genuinely unusual. I know you don't. That's what I mean. From the kitchen came the sound of Frank doing the dishes. Not loudly, just present. The ordinary sound of someone occupying the same space and maintaining the small rituals that held a household together. What happens to you now? Grayson said. After all this resolves, I go back. She said it without hesitation, which surprised him slightly. The company is still mine. The people who tried to take it are going to be prosecuted. There's a board that needs to be restructured, and a staff that's been operating without clear leadership for weeks, and a product line that... She stopped herself. Sorry. I default to the operational. I noticed. It's a flaw. It's also how you built the thing in the first place. She looked at him. That's a more charitable interpretation than the one I usually give myself. The uncharitable one being what? That I built something significant and then lived entirely inside the building of it and forgot that the building was supposed to serve a purpose larger than itself. She said it like she'd said it to herself before, tested the sentence, found it accurate enough to keep. My company employs nearly 6,000 people. I used to know why that mattered, not just financially, genuinely why it mattered, what we were building, what it was for. She looked toward the window. Somewhere around year 7, I started knowing the metrics of it and forgetting the meaning of it. The metrics got better and better, and the meaning got, she gestured slightly, theoretical. What changed it? Today. She said it simply. Not in a... She seemed to anticipate the way that sounded and adjusted. Not in a dramatic conversion sense. I don't do dramatic conversions. It's more that today gave me a day that was entirely stripped of the metrics. No dashboards, no quarterly projections, no KPIs. Just, here's the problem, and here's what matters, and what do you do? She paused. And what matters turned out to be very clear. Grayson looked at her for a moment. She was looking at Chloe again, at the small sleeping shape on the fold-out couch, with the blanket pulled up and one hand tucked under her chin. She reminded me of something, Victoria said quietly. While she was playing. I haven't thought about my mother playing piano in years. I blocked it out, I think. It's easier to not want things you've decided are not your life. She turned the water glass slowly. She played with something my mother had, that quality of being genuinely inside it, My mother tried to teach me, and I gave up, and she... A pause that lasted one beat too long. She died when I was 14, heart condition nobody had caught. Her voice stayed even, but it cost something. I decided when I was 15 that wanting things and losing them was a bad investment, and I spent the next 16 years building something that would never leave because it was mine, and I controlled every variable. The kitchen sounds had stopped. The house was very quiet. "How's that working out?" Grayson said. She made the sound again. The one from the truck that morning that lived in the space between a laugh and something sadder. "About as well as you'd expect." She looked at him directly. "I have $11 billion, and I had to borrow a flannel shirt this morning. The flannel shirt is available whenever you need it." "That's actually very kind." She seemed to realize the absurdity of thanking someone for flannel shirt availability while their company was worth $11 billion, and the corner of her mouth moved. "I realize how that sounds. It sounds like a person who's having a rough Tuesday. It's been the roughest Tuesday I've had in some time." "And the most useful?" She looked at him, considered. "Yes," she said. "Probably yes." He slept on Frank's couch that night. Real sleep. The deep and non-negotiable kind that the body imposed after sufficient expenditure. And he woke at 6:15 to the smell of coffee and the sound of someone in the kitchen moving quietly. He lay there for a moment in the gray early light, doing the inventory that people did after days like the previous one, checking that everything was where it was supposed to be, that the situation had not changed shape in the night. It hadn't. The agents were still outside. Chloe was still asleep. The warrants were still in effect. He got up and went to the kitchen and found Victoria at the counter with a mug, looking out Frank's small kitchen window at the backyard. She was wearing the same borrowed clothes. She hadn't slept much. He could see that in the way she was standing, the particular uprightness of someone maintaining their posture against fatigue rather than doing it naturally. "You should have taken the couch," he said. "I had the cot. It was fine." "Was it?" "No, but it was sufficient." She looked at him. "How's your ribs?" He'd almost forgotten about them. He touched his side. The bruising had deepened overnight. He could feel it clearly now, a hot stiffness in the middle ribs on the right. "Annoying, not serious. You should get them looked at." "I will." "After the statement today." She nodded. They both knew the day was going to be long in a specific procedural way. Statements, documentation, formal interviews, the grinding machinery of a federal investigation that moved with thoroughness rather than speed. He had already called Paulette the night before and asked if she could take Chloe for the day, explaining only that he had some legal matters to handle. Paulette, who was a fundamentally decent person and asked fewer follow-up questions than he deserved, had agreed. "I need to tell you something," Victoria said. She was still looking out the window. "Before today starts and things get formal and everything becomes official record." He waited. "Marsh called me last night, after you hung up on him." She turned from the window. "He called through my old personal number. I didn't answer, but he left a voicemail. I've already sent it to Thomas." She paused. "He offered you $250,000, directly to you. He said the offer was still open and that you should know that helping me was going to complicate your life significantly and that you had a daughter to think about, and that being a witness in a federal case wasn't going to be clean or fast." She held his gaze. "He was right about the last part, to be clear. This is going to follow you for months. Depositions, possibly testimony if it goes to trial. Your name is on a federal witness record. Some of it will be public." "I know. I want to make sure you actually know and aren't just saying it." Victoria. He said her name with the specific weight of someone who had thought about what they were doing and was not asking to be talked out of it. "I was in it when I went down that embankment. I was in it when I loaded you into a borrowed truck and drove to a lawyer's back door. I'm in it now." He looked at her steadily. "I'm not asking to get out." She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her face that she didn't hide, which he was beginning to understand was significant. That this was a person who hid things habitually and well, and when she didn't, it meant something. "Okay," she said. "Okay." The coffee was good. Frank bought the expensive kind, which was one of his few concessions to luxury, and it was one of the better cups Grayson had had in months. He stood at the counter and drank it and let the morning be the morning for a few minutes before everything official began again. When this is over, Victoria said carefully, like she was testing the ground before putting weight on it. When the investigation is resolved, and my name is cleared and the company is restabilized, I want to do something. You don't need to. I'm not offering charity. She said it clearly, without defensiveness. That's not what this is. I want to offer you work, real work, contracted, at real rates. Meridian is expanding its physical campus in 2 sites, one upstate, one in the valley. The construction management side has been contracted out to a firm I've never trusted, and I've been looking for a reason to restructure it. She paused. I'm not fabricating a position. I'm telling you that I have work that needs doing, and you're someone who does it well. He was quiet for a moment. You've known me for 1 day. I've watched you make decisions under pressure for 1 very full day, she said. That's more information than most hiring processes generate. A pause. I'm not asking you to decide now. I'm asking you to think about it. He thought about it. He thought about the rent in 11 days and the crack in the windshield and the $400 gap and the dripping faucet that was currently, presumably, still dripping in an empty house. He thought about what it would mean for Chloe, for the piano lessons, for the choices he made every month about what to pay and what to postpone. He thought about the difference between accepting something because you needed it and accepting it because it was right. I'll think about it, he said. She nodded. That was enough for now. The formal interviews took most of the day. The federal building on Archer in the daylight was less intimidating than it had been during the stop-and-go of yesterday's operational chaos. It was just a building, government-issued in its aesthetics, fluorescent in its lighting, with the particular institutional smell of carpet cleaner and recycled air. Agent Reeve met them in the lobby himself. He was 40-something, compact, with the kind of face that was professionally unremarkable, and he shook both their hands with the same measured efficiency he apparently applied to everything. You had a productive day yesterday, he said to Grayson. I had an eventful day yesterday, Grayson said. Productive implies I knew what I was doing. Reeve looked at him with something that was not quite a smile. We'll call it both. They were separated for the formal statements, which Grayson had expected. He spent 3 hours with Reeve and a second agent named Cortez in a room with a recording device and a glass of water and a series of questions that started at the beginning and did not skip a single increment. Reeve was thorough in the way a good structural inspector was thorough, not trying to catch Grayson in anything, just building a complete picture with no gaps. Grayson answered everything directly and without embellishment. At one point, Reeve said, When Marsh called you, you said you almost didn't answer. I almost didn't. Why did you? Unsaved numbers sometimes matter, Grayson said. I learned that in construction. An unknown caller might be a client, might be a supplier with a time-sensitive issue. You don't know until you pick up. Reeve wrote something. And when you understood who it was and what he was offering, I understood what I was being asked to do, and I understood what I wasn't going to do. Just like that. Grayson looked at him. Just like that. Oh, Reeve clicked his pen once. Most people would have considered it. I have a daughter, Grayson said. I've been considering it my whole life, what I'm going to do and what I'm not. You decide some things in advance so you don't have to recalculate them under pressure. He paused. This was one of those things. Reeve looked at him for a moment with an expression that was still professionally measured, but had something underneath it that was slightly different from professional. Then he moved to the next question. They came out of their respective interview rooms within 20 minutes of each other, both carrying the particular hollowness of people who had talked for a very long time and had no more words immediately available. Victoria looked pale under the fluorescence, and she was moving carefully, her ribs clearly worse after a night on the cot. She had refused the hospital again that morning, and Grayson had not pushed it, but he was watching her. How was yours? She said. Long, thorough. Same. She rubbed the back of her neck. Reeve is very good. He is. He asked me twice about the same specific transaction, and each time from a slightly different angle. She frowned slightly. I appreciated it. That level of detail means he's building something that'll hold. Reeve came out behind her and stopped them briefly in the corridor. We'll need you both available for follow-up over the next week. Likely 2 or 3 more sessions as we build the full timeline. He looked at Victoria. Miss Sterling, I'd recommend you avoid public statements until we've completed the first phase of evidence review. That includes social media, press contacts, and internal company communications beyond operational necessity. Understood. And Mr. Reed, he turned to Grayson, your truck has been located. It was found in a commercial lot 4 miles from the Route 9 incident site. Crime scene is done with it. You can collect it today from the Millhaven impound on Fletcher. He paused. The tailgate's damaged. Appears they used it to look for something in the bed. Looking for the drive, Grayson understood. They hadn't found it in the truck because the drive had never been in the truck. Thank you, he said. Reeve nodded once. He started to move away, then stopped. Off the record. Both of them looked at him. What you did yesterday. He said it to Grayson specifically. The decision you made on that embankment, and then every decision after it. I've worked cases where the evidence existed, but we couldn't build the chain because the one person who could connect the links chose not to. He was not given to sentiment. That was clear from every interaction. But he was saying this anyway, in the manner of someone who said few things that didn't need saying. It mattered. It's going to matter for a long time. Then he was gone, back down the corridor with his measured stride. Grayson stood in the fluorescent hallway and absorbed that. Victoria was watching him. He doesn't say things like that, she said quietly. How would you know? You just met him. I can tell. She paused. He meant it. They walked out of the building into the afternoon light, which was cold and bright and completely without the previous day's storm. The gray sedan with the agents was pulled up at the curb. They'd been with Victoria all day, present but not intrusive. Grayson stopped on the steps. He needed to get to the impound on Fletcher. He needed to check his house. The agents had cleared it earlier that morning, no indication it had been entered, but he needed to see it himself. He needed to collect Chloe from Paulette's. He needed to get back to the ordinary architecture of his life, which had been suspended for approximately 30 hours while something enormous had moved through it. Victoria stopped beside him. Your house is fine, she said, reading something in his face. The agents cleared it. I know, I need to see it anyway. She looked out at the street. I'm being taken to a hotel the Bureau is using for the next few days, more secure than trying to open my own place. A pause. Apparently 3 of my home security cameras were remotely accessed at some point in the last month. Your own system. My own system. By people who had the administrative credentials because they managed the infrastructure contract. Her voice was flat. Another thing I didn't know to look for. He looked at her. She was standing in the afternoon light with the bruise around her eye and the borrowed clothes and the stripped-down quality that the day before had given her, and she looked like someone standing at the edge of a very large amount of work that had not yet begun. You're going to be okay, he said. I know. She said it without false brightness, just as a fact she'd already accepted. It's going to be complicated and long, and there are going to be days when I don't know if the company survives the reputational damage regardless of whether I win in court. She paused. But yes, I'm going to be okay. Good. She looked at him for a moment. Then she did something that he didn't expect. She reached out and put her hand briefly on his arm. Not a formal handshake, not a hug, something in between, something small and deliberate. Thank you, Grayson Reed, she said. He looked down at her hand and then at her face. You already said that. I know. I wanted to say it when things were slightly less on fire. She took her hand back. It sounds different when you're not fleeing through a forest. It does, he said. You're welcome. She almost smiled. The bruised eye made it asymmetric and slightly crooked and entirely unpolished, and it was the most natural expression he'd seen on her face in 30 hours. Then the agent from the sedan was at her shoulder with the quiet professionalism of someone whose entire job was transitions, and she went with him, and Grayson stood on the steps and watched the gray car pull away into the afternoon. He stood there for a minute. He had a truck to collect and a house to check and a daughter to pick up. He had rent due in 10 days and a faucet that still dripped and a windshield crack that still needed fixing. He had a federal witness record with his name on it and follow-up interviews over the next week and a tailgate that needed replacing. He had a job offer to think about. He put his hands in his pockets and started down the steps. The afternoon was cold and clear and entirely ordinary in the way that only presented itself after extraordinary things had passed through, and Grayson Reed walked into it the way he walked into every day, with the particular forward motion of a man who had things to do and people depending on him, and no particular patience for standing still when moving was available. The truck was waiting at the impound on Fletcher. Chloe was waiting at Paulette's. Everything else could be sorted from there. The faucet got fixed on a Thursday. It wasn't a significant event. Grayson replaced the cartridge in 20 minutes with parts from Hendrick's Hardware that cost $11, and when he turned the water back on and the drip was gone, he stood at the sink for a moment in the quiet kitchen and felt something that was not quite satisfaction and not quite relief, but lived somewhere in that neighborhood. He had been meaning to fix it for weeks. He had fixed it now. That was the whole story of that particular thing. The larger story was still in motion. The weeks following the federal intake had the texture of sustained institutional pressure. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just the relentless grinding forward of a legal process that moved at its own speed and did not accommodate impatience. Grayson appeared for 2 more formal interviews in the first 10 days, both with Reeve, both thorough and methodical. He answered the same questions from slightly different angles and gave the same answers because the same answers were the true ones, and Reeve built his timeline piece by careful piece with the patience of someone who understood that a case that couldn't be challenged in court was worth more than a case that moved fast. Daniel Marsh surrendered to federal custody on day 9. His attorney had spent 8 days constructing a defense that collapsed when the prosecution produced transaction records Marsh had apparently believed were fully obscured. The injunction fell apart the same morning. Grayson watched the brief news item about it on his phone while eating a sandwich in the cab of his truck during a lunch break on the bathroom retile job he'd finally gotten around to rescheduling, the one he'd abandoned the morning of the storm. He read the 3 paragraphs twice, noted that Victoria's name appeared only as the founder of Meridian Technologies, and not as a target or suspect, and went back to work. He told Chloe the work stuff was mostly resolved that evening, and she looked at him with her mother's eyes and said, "Does that mean we can go home?" They were still at Frank's. Frank had not mentioned this once. "Yeah," Grayson said, "we can go home." She appeared satisfied. She went to pack her things, which she had spread throughout Frank's guest area, with the organic territorial expansion that 8-year-olds conducted instinctively in any space they occupied for more than 2 nights. Grayson watched her collect her ribbon and competition card from the windowsill where she'd arranged them, and he felt the tightness in his chest that he'd carried since the morning of the storm finally begin to ease. Not gone, just easing. Frank drove them home in his Silverado. Grayson's own truck was back. Tailgate replaced courtesy of the federal property damage documentation that Reeve had filed with the quiet efficiency of a man who understood that civilian cooperation deserved something functional in return. They pulled into the driveway and Chloe was out the door before Frank had fully stopped, running up the front path in the manner of someone for whom 3 days away from home had been an adventure and was now definitively over. Frank cut the engine. "You're going to be fine," he said. It was not the kind of thing Frank usually said. He was not a man who trafficked in reassurance because he considered unearned reassurance a disrespect to the person receiving it. He said it now because he meant it as a statement of observed fact rather than comfort, and Grayson understood it that way. "I know," Grayson said. "The job offer." "I'm thinking about it." Frank nodded. He looked out through the windshield at the house, at Chloe trying the front door, at the ordinary winter evening shape of a residential street. "A man should know what his work is worth," he said. "That's all." He said it without weight or agenda, and then he reached over and unlocked Grayson's door in the way he always did when a conversation was complete. Victoria called on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks after the intake. Grayson was in the kitchen helping Chloe with a math worksheet that had both of them slightly frustrated. Chloe because the problems were genuinely difficult. Grayson because he was discovering that 4th grade math had moved on from the version he remembered in ways he found mildly humbling. His phone lit up with her name. He'd saved it somewhere in the 2nd week, and he told Chloe he'd be back in 2 minutes and went to the back door. The cold came in when he opened it. He stepped onto the small concrete stoop. "How are you?" she said. "Surviving 4th grade fractions," he said. "You?" surviving a board restructuring that makes fourth-grade fractions look manageable. Her voice was tired, but it had a quality to it that wasn't there in the days immediately after. Not lighter exactly, but less compressed, like something had been given room. The board has been reshuffled with 3 independent directors who were not previously compromised. The new CFO starts Monday. The share structure is stable. She paused. We announced a product roadmap yesterday. The first one in 8 months that I actually believe in. That's significant. It is. She was quiet for a moment. The civil suit from the employees whose pension funds were affected by the fraud is going forward separately. I've committed personal funds to restitution. My attorneys are not thrilled with that decision. Why did you do it? Because it was right. She said it simply, the way he'd said something similar to her on a different day about a different choice, and he caught the echo of it in her voice, caught that she'd meant him to catch it. He looked out at the backyard, the small, patchy grass, the fence with the loose board he'd been meaning to fix. The offer, he said, still open. It will always be open. I've been thinking about it. I know. You said that. I meant it. He leaned against the doorframe. The thing I've been thinking about is whether it changes what happened, the way it reads. He was trying to say it correctly. You offer me work, I take it, and then the story becomes a story where a guy helped someone because he was paid for it eventually, even if the payment came after. The chronology is right, but the meaning gets confused. She was quiet on the other end. Not the silence of someone without an answer, but of someone giving the answer the weight it deserved. I thought about that too, she said. I thought about it before I made the offer, and then I thought, the people who reduce it to that are people who are always going to look for the transactional version, because that's the only version they can understand. She paused. The people who know you, Frank, Chloe, the school office lady who remembers what you asked her the morning everything started, they know what the order of operations was. The work offer doesn't change what you did. It just means I get to keep working with someone I trust, which is a rarer resource than money. He was quiet for a moment. Also, she added, your work is good. I looked up the properties you've worked on. I spoke to 2 of your past clients. You're genuinely skilled, and I need skilled people. A pause. I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering you a job because you're the right person for it. Those 2 things are allowed to coexist. They are, he said. So I'll take it. The pause that came after that was a different kind. Not waiting, not tactical, just the small beat of 2 people on either side of a decision that has just been made and is now the new shape of things. Good, she said, and then, because she was learning when to leave things where they landed, how's the fraction problem? Unsolved. I was very good at math. Do you want to talk Chloe through it? Another pause. Shorter this time, and when Victoria spoke again, there was something in her voice that was careful and warm in equal measure. The voice of someone stepping toward something they hadn't let themselves step toward in a long time. Put her on. He went back inside and handed the phone to Chloe and said, her name is Victoria. She's good at fractions. Chloe looked at the phone with the focused pragmatism of someone who had a problem and had just been handed a resource, and said, hello, in the business-like tone she used when adult assistance was required, and Grayson stood at the sink and fixed himself a glass of water and listened to his daughter work through a fraction problem with a billionaire CEO who talked to her with the specific quality of someone paying real attention. He stood there and felt something settle, not dramatically, not with ceremony, just the quiet, unremarkable way that things settled when they had found their level. The trial, what became 3 separate but connected federal cases, ran over the following 8 months with the institutional comprehensiveness that federal prosecution brought to bear when it had sufficient evidence and sufficient motive. The evidence was overwhelming. Grayson's testimony occupied one morning on the stand, and Reeve had prepared him so thoroughly for the experience that the actual event was almost anticlimactic. He answered questions clearly and without elaboration, and withstood a cross-examination from Marsh's defense attorney that tried twice to suggest his actions had been mercenary and failed both times because the timeline of events simply did not support it. Holloway entered a guilty plea in the fourth month and cooperated with the prosecution in exchange for a reduced sentence, which accelerated the remaining cases considerably. Dung's trial ran 3 weeks and ended with conviction on 11 counts. Marsh, who had retained the most expensive defense available and spent most of the proceeding looking like a man who genuinely could not comprehend that the world was not going to arrange itself to his convenience, was convicted on 17 counts, including the attempted murder charge related to Victoria's accident on Route 9. The attempted murder conviction carried a sentence that meant Daniel Marsh would be an old man by the time he was free, if he was free at all. Victoria was in the courtroom for that verdict. Grayson was there too, at her request, sitting 2 rows back with Reeve and Cortez. He watched her face when the verdict was read. She didn't cry. She didn't perform relief or triumph. She sat very straight in her seat and listened to the judge's words, and when it was over, she sat for a moment with her hands folded in her lap, and then she turned and found Grayson's face in the row behind her. She looked at him for 3 seconds. Then she turned back around and gathered her things, and that was it. That was the whole expression of it, the 3 seconds. And it was enough. It was exactly enough. The financial news cycle treated Victoria's return to public-facing leadership as a story about resilience and corporate governance, which was the accurate surface reading, but missed most of what was actually true about it. Grayson watched one of the segments on his phone during a lunch break on the Meridian campus construction site, his 3rd week on the job, managing the structural framing on the north building, and found himself slightly disconnected from the version of events being described, which was clean and narrative and had none of the rain or the mud or the hour they'd spent in Frank's truck waiting to see if a lawyer's phone call would hold. The reporter said Victoria Sterling had demonstrated extraordinary composure in the face of a calculated corporate attack. And Grayson thought about a woman in borrowed clothes eating half a piece of Frank's toast because she was too exhausted to eat more, and thought, yes. And also, that is not most of it. The most of it was not the kind of thing that fit in a 2-minute news segment. He had lunch with Victoria twice a month now, which had started as a professional check-in on the construction project and had become something less defined and more honest. The kind of conversation that built up in layers over time, where you could reference things from 4 conversations ago and the other person knew what you meant. She came to the site occasionally and walked the framing with him and asked questions that were genuinely informed because she had clearly spent time learning enough about construction to have a real conversation about it, which was a Victoria Sterling thing to do. She did not like being in a situation where she didn't understand what she was looking at. He liked that about her. He had started to notice the specific inventory of things he liked about her, which was itself a thing he noticed. She noticed too. He could see it in the way she navigated the space around it. Careful, not pushing, giving it the time it needed. She was a person who had learned caution about wanting things. He was a person who had learned caution about people leaving. Those were not incompatible, but they required patience, and patience was something they were both, by different routes, reasonably good at. In the 6th month after the trial, on a Friday evening when Chloe had a sleepover at a classmate's house, and the weekend was the open and directionless kind that Grayson rarely had, he called Victoria without a specific reason, and they talked for 2 hours about nothing in particular. About Frank, about the product roadmap she was cautiously proud of, about a book Grayson had been reading for 3 months without making significant progress, about what Chloe had said to her during the fraction call that had made Victoria sit quietly for a while afterward. She said, Victoria told him, "You explain things like someone who actually cares if I understand, not just if I get the answer." A pause. "I didn't know what to do with that." "What did you do?" "I said thank you, and then I thought about it for 2 days." Her voice was quiet on the phone. "I've been doing a lot of that lately. Thinking about what it means to do things in a way that actually serves the person in front of you versus just achieving the outcome." She paused. "I was not good at that before." "You're getting better at it." "I'm trying." A pause. "Chloe makes it clear when I'm not." He laughed. "She does that." "It's useful. I should have had an 8-year-old holding me accountable years ago." Her voice had the warmth in it now that it hadn't had in Frank's kitchen on the first night. Not performed warmth, not social lubrication, but the actual thing, the kind that came from being known by someone and not minding. He sat in his kitchen in the quiet house and thought about what the morning of the storm had started and where it had arrived, and he thought, You cannot design this. You cannot build toward it deliberately because you cannot see it from the outside. Cannot predict that the thing requiring you to be a particular kind of person in a particular moment will also be the thing that shows you what you are capable of wanting. He had stopped at a crash on a mountain road because there was nobody else and it was the only available right thing. He had not done it for what came after. That was the part that mattered. The part that couldn't be manufactured after the fact. The part that Marsh's defense attorney had tried to complicate and failed to complicate because it was simply, stubbornly true. He had stopped because it was the right thing. Everything else came from that. He asked her to dinner in the 7th month. Not the lunch check-ins, not a professional context. Dinner, specific restaurant, specific evening, the kind of asking that made the nature of the invitation unmistakable. She said yes before he'd finished the sentence, which suggested she had been waiting for the question, which he suspected she had been. The restaurant was not expensive. He had deliberately not chosen something expensive because the thing he was trying to say was not about expense. It was a place on Main Street in Millhaven that had good food and mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu that changed weekly. He had been going there for years, and the owner knew his name and Chloe's name and knew that he took his coffee without sugar. Victoria arrived in clothes that were hers, well-fitting, understated, the particular quality of someone who had money and did not feel the need to announce it. The bruise around her eye was a year gone. Her shoulder had healed. She looked like herself, which was not a phrase Grayson could have applied to her in the first 24 hours, when she had looked like a version of herself under extreme duress. She looked at the restaurant with the expression she got when she was recalibrating an expectation. Then she sat down and picked up the chalkboard menu and read it and said, "The duck looks good. It's always good, so is the pasta with the walnut sauce." Both? Probably both. They ordered both. They split them. The owner, Marco, came out and shook Grayson's hand and looked at Victoria with the frank curiosity of a man who had known Grayson for years and had an opinion about what Grayson needed and whether this was it, and apparently arrived at a satisfactory conclusion because he said, "Wonderful to meet you," and went back to the kitchen with the air of someone pleased with how things were developing. "Your town likes you," Victoria said. "My town is small and undifferentiated about most things. It likes most people." "No, it likes you specifically." She looked around the room, at the couple at the corner table who had nodded at Grayson when he came in, at the bartender who'd said hey without being asked what he wanted because she already knew. "There's a difference between being in a place and belonging in it." He looked at her. "You don't feel that." "I feel it here," she said it looking at him. "I didn't before." He held her gaze. "Victoria." "I know." She looked down at her water glass. "I know what I'm saying." She was quiet for a moment, the careful kind of quiet, the kind that held something being decided. "I spent 16 years building things that couldn't leave me, and it turns out the things I actually wanted were things I couldn't control or contain." She looked back up. "That's an uncomfortable realization for someone with my management style. What did you want?" She answered without flinching, which he understood was not easy for her. She was not a person given to vulnerability, and she had not arrived at it cheaply. "This," she said, "a dinner on a Tuesday. Someone who doesn't care about the company valuation. A kid who tells me when I'm doing it wrong." She paused. "Someone to come home to." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Her hand turned under his and held it. That was how it started. Not dramatically, not with ceremony, just dinner on a Tuesday, duck and pasta and a window table in a small restaurant in Millhaven. Two people who had arrived at the same place by entirely different and entirely improbable routes, holding on. They were married on a Saturday in May, 14 months after the storm. Not the kind of wedding that made news or required coordination across time zones. A lakeside ceremony at the state park 15 miles outside Millhaven, 45 people, a late afternoon in which the light did what light did in early May in that country, long and gold and slightly too beautiful to be entirely trusted. Frank was there in the only suit Grayson had ever seen him wear, which appeared to be the same suit from the last 3 occasions requiring one. Arthur Wills came, which surprised Grayson until he thought about it and found it didn't. Reeves sent a note that was 2 sentences and entirely sufficient. Victoria's brother came from San Francisco and was tall and direct like she was, and embraced Grayson with the specific quality of someone who had been waiting to meet the person his sister had told him about and had formed an opinion in advance. "She calls you sensible," he said. "She means it as the highest possible compliment." "I gathered," Grayson said. Mrs. Hannigan came because Chloe had invited her personally with the forthright lack of ceremony that characterized most of Chloe's social invitations, and Mrs. Hannigan sat in the third row and cried from approximately the opening remarks onward, with no apparent concern for what anyone thought about this, which was, Grayson decided, the most human he'd ever seen her. Chloe played piano. They had brought a portable keyboard to the ceremony site, which had required more logistical coordination than any other element of the wedding, and Chloe played the Chopin Nocturne from the competition, the piece she'd been working on since January of the previous year, the piece she'd played while her father sat in the fifth row coming down from 30 hours of sustained crisis and felt something settle. She played it better now. Not technically perfect, Mrs. Hannigan would have identified 2 moments where the phrasing rushed slightly, but inhabited, genuinely inhabited, with the quality her teacher had called emotionally mature, and that Grayson simply called hers. Victoria stood at the lakeshore and listened with her eyes slightly too bright, and when Chloe finished and looked up for approval, Victoria did not give the measured adult response of someone managing their reaction. She walked over and crouched down and hugged Chloe the way Chloe preferred to be hugged, firmly, without the tentative quality of someone who wasn't sure they were allowed, and said something in her ear that Grayson couldn't hear from where he was standing. Later, Chloe told him Victoria had said, "That one was for my mother." He stood at the lake's edge and let the afternoon light and the water and the sound of 45 people who had come because they wanted to be there settle around him, and he thought about all the mornings he'd stood in the driveway of the small house and felt the gap between what was and what he'd hoped for. And he thought about how rarely it was possible to trace a clear line from a single moment to everything that followed. He could trace it. He could trace it exactly. There was a guardrail with a gap in it on a mountain road in November. There was a wet embankment and a decision made in 3 seconds without deliberation. There was a woman in a wrecked car who needed help, and he had been the only person who stopped. And the only reason he'd been the only person who stopped was that he had already decided long before that morning, without drama, just through the daily accumulation of choices, what kind of person he was going to be. He had not stopped because he expected anything from it. He had not stopped because he calculated the return. He had stopped because the alternative was driving past, and driving past was not something he was willing to be. That is, when the long view is taken, the only thing any of it came down to, not the investigation or the evidence or the courtroom or the job or the dinner on a Tuesday, just the original moment on a wet road in November, and a man who had already decided who he was, and the chain of everything that followed from one ordinary act of refusing to look away. People talk about fate and fortune and the grand design of things, and maybe there is something to all of that. Grayson had no particular quarrel with the idea that the universe occasionally arranged itself with intention, but he had come to believe, in the year and change between that morning and this afternoon, that what looked like fortune from the outside was most often just character meeting circumstance, that the extraordinary outcomes in a life were usually not the result of extraordinary people, but of ordinary people who had done the quiet and unglamorous work of becoming someone specific, and then held to that when it mattered. He was a man who fixed things, houses, structures, the parts of physical reality that came apart and needed reassembling. He was not skilled at the grand gesture or the brilliant improvisation. He was skilled at showing up and doing the work until the work was done, and at not leaving when leaving was easier, and at the particular kind of faithfulness that did not require an audience. That was who he was. He had built it slowly, out of ordinary days, and it had been enough. It had, in the end, been more than enough. Victoria appeared beside him at the water's edge. She moved quietly when she chose to, which was a quality he'd adjusted to over months of learning how she occupied space. She had her shoes off, which was a very recent Victoria Sterling development that Chloe had directly encouraged by setting the precedent at every outdoor occasion she could engineer. She stood in the grass at the lake's edge and looked at the water. "Your town is crying," she said, Mrs. Hannigan has been crying for 40 minutes. Frank is also crying, very quietly and in a way that dares anyone to mention it. That tracks. She leaned into him slightly. He put his arm around her. They stood there in the afternoon light looking at the lake, which was the color of the sky, which was the particular pale and perfect blue that appeared in this part of the country only in early May and never lasted long enough. I keep thinking about what Chloe's judge wrote, she said. Emotionally mature for the student's age, she paused. I think she got it from you. She got it from having to figure things out early, he said. Kids who grow up watching a parent carry something alone. They learn to read situations. They learn what matters. It's not a gift I would have chosen to give her. No, but she has it. She does. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then, I want to give her more time. I know I can't replace what she lost. I'm not trying to. But I want her to have someone who shows up, consistently. She said it carefully, the way she said things she'd thought about extensively and still wanted to say out loud to check them against reality. I want that to be me, if she'll let it. He looked at her. You should tell her that. I did. Last week, she said. Victoria paused with the look of someone reporting something that had affected them more than they'd prepared for. She said, I know, you already do. He didn't say anything. He tightened his arm around her slightly, which said it instead. Down the bank, Chloe was standing at the water's edge with Victoria's brother, teaching him something that appeared to involve throwing small flat stones in a specific way, and he was trying it badly, and she was correcting his technique with the frank professionalism she brought to instruction. Frank was watching from his chair with the expression of a man at rest, present in a moment without needing it to be anything other than what it was. This was not a perfect life. The rent was no longer a crisis, but the work was still demanding, and the hours were still long, and there were mornings when everything felt harder than it should, and evenings when patience ran short and words came out wrong and had to be walked back. Chloe was 9 now and had opinions about everything with a force of conviction that was impressive and occasionally exhausting. Victoria had a company to run that required her in ways that sometimes pulled at the edges of everything else, and she was still learning, genuinely still learning without pretending she had it figured out, how to stop when stopping was the right call. They were imperfect people doing imperfect work on an imperfect life together, which is to say, they were doing what everyone who loved anyone was doing, just with the specific ingredients that chance and character had given them. Grayson Reed had stopped at a guardrail on a mountain road because it was the only right thing to do. Not because he knew what was on the other side of that decision, not because he had calculated what stopping would cost him or give him, just because a person needed help and he was there, and he had already decided in all the ordinary days before that one who he was going to be when it counted. The lake was still. The light was going gold at the edges, the way light did at the end of the best days. He had stopped at a stranger's crash in the storm. What he had found was everything.